Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're going to explore the fascinating world of cells. Our focus will be on their structure and functions. The slide you see now is the title slide, Cells Structure and Functions. Over the course of this presentation, we'll look at what makes up a cell, how they work, and why they are essential to all living organisms. I'm excited to take you through this journey into the microscopic world. Let's get started. Let's take a quick look at the contents of today's presentation. We'll start with the discovery of the cell, which was a major milestone in biology. Then, we'll explore the shape of cells, since their form can tell us a lot about their function. Next, we'll dive into cell structure and how each part contributes to the overall functioning of the cell. We'll also discuss the size of cells, which is quite fascinating because it influences how cells operate and interact. And finally, all of these points come together to give us a comprehensive understanding of the basic unit of life, the cell itself. As we go through each section, keep in mind how all these aspects connect to the bigger picture of biology and life sciences. Today, we're diving into the discovery of the cell, which is a fascinating chapter in the history of biology. The discovery marked the beginning of understanding the building blocks of life. It all started with the invention of the microscope, which allowed scientists to see things that were previously invisible to the naked eye. One of the key figures was Robert Hooke, who in 1665 used a microscope to look at a slice of cork. He noticed tiny, box-like structures, what he called cells, because they reminded him of the small rooms monks lived in. Following Hooke, Anton van Leeuwenhoek improved microscope technology and was the first to observe single-celled organisms, which he called animalcules. His observations showed that life existed at a microscopic level, opening up an entirely new world. This discovery was crucial because it shifted our understanding of living organisms, emphasizing that all life is made up of these basic units, cells. It set the stage for the development of cell theory, which states that all living things are composed of cells. So the discovery of the cell wasn't just about seeing tiny structures. It transformed how scientists viewed life itself. It connected to our overall theme by showing how foundational microscopic worlds are to understanding biology and the complexity of life. In 1665, Robert Hooke made a groundbreaking observation when he looked at slices of cork through a simple microscope. Now, cork is actually a part of the bark of a tree, and what he did was take very thin slices of it to examine more closely. When he looked at these slices, he noticed that they were made up of tiny, partitioned boxes or compartments. These boxes looked a lot like a honeycomb pattern. What's really interesting is that each of these boxes was separated from the others by walls or partitions. Hooke named these boxes cells, which is the term we still use today. However, it's important to understand that what Hooke was seeing were actually dead cells, because the cork cells had no living content inside. It wasn't until much later, with the development of better microscopes, that scientists could observe cells in living organisms. For about 150 years after Hooke's discovery, very little was known about the true nature of cells. But today, thanks to advanced microscopes with much higher magnification, we now understand a great deal more about cell structures and their functions. This discovery laid the foundation for modern cell biology and helps us see how fundamental cells are to all living things. Let's take a closer look at the cell, which is truly the fundamental building block of all living organisms. When we talk about cells, we're referring to the tiny, but incredibly complex units that make up everything from the smallest bacteria to the largest mammals. They are the basic units of life, responsible for everything from growth and reproduction to communication and energy production. Understanding cells is crucial because they help us see how life functions on a microscopic level. Inside each cell, there are specialized structures called organelles that perform specific tasks, like the nucleus, which acts as the control center, or the mitochondria, often called the powerhouses of the cell because they generate energy. This slide emphasizes that exploring the cell is key to understanding biology as a whole. Whether we're studying health, disease, or evolution, the cell provides the foundation for all these processes. So, as we move forward, keep in mind that the complexity inside these tiny units is what makes life possible and fascinating. Let's talk about the cell. The cell is essentially the basic building block of all living organisms. Think of it as the fundamental unit that makes up every living thing around us. Now, if we compare this to something familiar like bricks used in construction, you'll notice that buildings are made of similar bricks, but they can have vastly different designs, shapes, and sizes. In the same way, cells in living organisms are quite complex and dynamic structures. Unlike non-living bricks, cells are alive. They carry out numerous functions necessary for life. They're not just simple blocks. They have intricate parts working together to keep the organism alive and functioning. And here's an interesting point. Although organisms are all made of cells, they can look and behave very differently from one another. A tiny bacteria, a plant, and a human all are made of cells, but their cells are specialized and adapted to their specific roles. So, understanding that the cell is the core unit helps us appreciate the diversity and complexity of life. It's the starting point for everything we'll explore about how living things grow, reproduce, and interact with their environment. Let's take a closer look at the egg of a hen. This tiny wonder actually represents a single cell, which might surprise you. What's fascinating is that it's large enough to be seen with the naked eye, meaning you don't need a microscope to observe it. This highlights how some biological structures are surprisingly visible, even at the cellular level. Understanding this egg helps us appreciate the complexity and scale of cells, especially when we connect it to the broader theme of how life begins and develops from a single cell. It's a perfect example of how something so simple can be so important in the study of biology. Organisms show a fascinating variety in their cell number, shape, and size. To study these tiny structures, scientists often use stains or dyes that color specific parts of the cell, making it easier to observe their detailed internal structure. There are millions of living organisms on Earth, and they come in many different shapes and sizes. Not only do the organisms vary, but their organs do as well, in shape, size, and the number of cells they contain. Now, can you guess how many cells are in a tall tree or a large animal like an elephant? The numbers are staggering, billions and trillions of cells. For example, the human body alone has trillions of cells that differ in shape and size, depending on their function. Different groups of cells work together to perform a wide variety of tasks necessary for life. This brings us to an important classification. Organisms made of more than one cell are called multicellular organisms. Think of humans, animals, plants. They all fall into this category. On the other hand, single-celled organisms, like bacteria and certain protists, are called unicellular organisms. Interestingly, even a single-celled organism can perform all the essential functions that multicellular organisms do, just on a simpler scale. This diversity in cell number and structure is a key part of understanding the complexity and adaptability of living organisms. Today, I want to talk about the shape of cells, which is a fundamental aspect of their structure and function. Cells come in a variety of shapes, and these shapes are not random. They are closely related to what the cell does. For example, some cells are elongated, like nerve cells, which helps them transmit signals efficiently. Others are more spherical, like blood cells, which allows them to move easily through blood vessels. The shape of a cell impacts its interactions with other cells and its environment. It also influences how nutrients and waste are exchanged. Understanding the shape of cells helps us appreciate how form and function are interconnected in biology. This concept ties directly into the overall theme of how cells are specialized to perform specific roles within the body. Let's talk about the shape of cells. Amoeba is a fascinating example because it doesn't have a fixed shape like many other organisms. Instead, it constantly changes its form as it moves and feeds. If you observe closely, you'll notice projections of different lengths sticking out from its body. These are called pseudopodia, and they help the amoeba move and capture food. These projections appear and disappear as needed, showing how adaptable it is. Now, a white blood cell, or WBC, in our blood is another example of a single cell that can change shape. But here, the key difference. While the WBC can change shape, it's still a cell within our body, whereas the amoeba is an independent organism that can survive on its own. Different types of cells, like blood cells, muscle cells, or nerve cells, have distinct shapes that suit their specific functions. For instance, nerve cells or neurons are often quite long and sometimes branched. This unique shape allows them to receive and transfer messages throughout the body, helping us control and coordinate our movements and responses. Generally, cells tend to be round, spherical, or elongated, but some can be much longer or branched, depending on what they need to do. All these variations in shape are closely related to their particular roles in the body. So, the shape of a cell is not just a random feature. It's a reflection of its function and importance in maintaining our health and activity. Let's talk about the size of cells. As you can see, cells come in a variety of sizes, which is quite fascinating. The size of a cell is crucial because it influences how efficiently it can carry out its functions. Smaller cells have a larger surface area relative to their volume, which allows for better exchange of materials like nutrients and waste. This is why many cells are microscopic. Think about bacteria or most human cells. Larger cells, on the other hand, often have specialized structures to help manage their volume. Understanding cell size helps us grasp why cells are designed the way they are and how that impacts their role within the organism. It's a key piece of the bigger picture of cellular function and overall health. The size of cells in living organisms can vary tremendously. Some cells are incredibly tiny, just a millionth of a meter, which we call a micrometer or micron. On the other hand, some cells can be quite large, measuring a few centimeters. Now, most cells are actually microscopic and can't be seen with the naked eye, so we need to use a microscope to observe them clearly. For example, bacteria have some of the smallest cells, typically around 0.1 to 0.5 micrometers in size. That's tiny. But then, there's the ostrich egg, which is the largest cell known. It measures about 170 millimeters by 130 millimeters. That's quite a contrast, showing just how diverse cell sizes can be in the natural world. This variation in size is a fascinating part of understanding how cells function and adapt within different organisms. Let's move on to Activity 8.2. First, you'll need to boil a hen's egg and then carefully remove the shell. Now, what do you observe? Interestingly, you can actually see this single cell with the naked eye without any magnifying device. The yellow part you see is the yolk, which is the main source of nutrients for the developing embryo. The white material surrounding it is called albumin, or egg white. When you boil the egg, the albumin solidifies, turning from a liquid into a firm, white substance. This activity helps us understand the basic structure of the egg as a single cell, and how heat causes the proteins in the albumin to denature and solidify. It's a simple but effective way to connect the concept of cells and their components to something we can observe directly. Now, let's move on to slide 14, which focuses on cell structure and function. First, understanding the basic structure of cells is crucial because it helps us grasp how they perform their various roles. Each cell has specialized parts, or organelles, that work together to keep the cell alive and functioning properly. For example, the nucleus acts as the control center, storing genetic information and directing activities. The cytoplasm, which is the fluid surrounding the organelles, provides a medium for chemical reactions to occur. The cell membrane is like a gatekeeper, regulating what enters and exits the cell, maintaining a stable environment. And then, there are structures like mitochondria, which are known as the powerhouses because they produce energy. Understanding these components highlights how structure relates directly to function. Each part has a specific role that contributes to the overall health and activity of the cell. This connection between structure and function is fundamental, tying back to our broader theme of how living organisms operate at the cellular level. By studying cell structure, we gain insights into the very building blocks of life and how complex processes are carried out at the microscopic scale. Let's take a closer look at cell structure and function in plants. Leaves are primarily responsible for the synthesis of food through the process of photosynthesis. This is where the plant converts sunlight carbon dioxide, and water into glucose and oxygen. It's a vital part of how plants produce the energy they need to grow and thrive. On the other hand, roots play a crucial role in absorbing water and minerals from the soil. These nutrients are essential for various plant functions, including growth and development. Think of the roots as the plant's underground support system, making sure it gets everything it needs from the environment. Connecting this to the overall theme, understanding these structures helps us appreciate how different parts of the plant work together to sustain life. The leaves and roots are like the plant's own food factory and nutrient supply chain, each with a specific, vital function that keeps the plant healthy and productive. Let's take a closer look at the parts of the cell, also known as cell organelles. The basic components of a cell include the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, and the nucleus. The cell membrane acts as a protective barrier, controlling what enters and exits the cell. It's like the cell's gatekeeper, ensuring the right substances get in and out. Inside, we have the cytoplasm, which is a gel-like substance that fills the cell and holds the organelles in place. Think of it as the cell's internal environment, providing a space for all the activities to happen. And then, there's the nucleus, often called the control center. It contains the cell's genetic material and directs all the cell's activities. These parts work together, connecting to the overall theme of how cells function efficiently to sustain life. Understanding these basic parts helps us see how cells carry out their vital roles in our bodies. Let's take a closer look at the cell membrane. The cytoplasm and nucleus are actually enclosed within this structure, which is also called the plasma membrane. Think of it as a flexible barrier that surrounds the cell's insides. Its main job is to separate the cell from its environment, creating a distinct boundary. This separation is crucial because it helps regulate what enters and exits the cell, maintaining the right conditions for the cell to function properly. The membrane not only keeps cells apart, but also isolates the cell from the surrounding medium, ensuring that internal processes happen in a controlled environment. Understanding the cell membrane is fundamental because it plays such a vital role in cell protection, communication, and overall health. Let's talk about the cytoplasm. It's the jelly-like substance that fills the space between the cell membrane and the nucleus. Think of it as the cell's interior soup, providing a supportive environment for all the cell's activities. Within this cytoplasm, you'll find various important components, known as organelles. These include mitochondria, which are like the cell's power plants, generating energy, Golgi bodies, which are involved in packaging and shipping proteins, and ribosomes, the tiny factories where proteins are made. Recognizing these components and understanding their roles helps us see how the cell functions as a whole. They work together within the cytoplasm, contributing to the cell's health and efficiency, which ties into our overall theme of understanding cellular structure and function. Let's talk about the nucleus, which is a really important part of any living cell. Think of it as the control center, because it plays a crucial role in managing the cell's activities. Usually, the nucleus is spherical in shape and is located right in the center of the cell. This central position is key because it allows the nucleus to coordinate and regulate what happens throughout the entire cell. Overall, understanding the nucleus helps us grasp how cells function and stay organized, which ties into the bigger picture of how life works at the cellular level. Now, in addition to the nucleus, there are these thread-like structures called chromosomes. These are really important because they carry genes, which are like the instructions for building and functioning of living organisms. Essentially, chromosomes play a key role in inheritance, helping transfer characters from parents to their offspring. What's interesting is that we can only see these chromosomes when the cell is dividing. During this process, the chromosomes become visible under a microscope because they condense and become more distinct. So, to connect this to the bigger picture, chromosomes are fundamental for passing on genetic information, ensuring that traits are inherited from one generation to the next. This is a crucial part of understanding how traits are inherited and how genetic information is organized within our cells. Now, let's look at the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. The nucleus of a bacterial cell, for example, is not as well organized as the nuclei you see in cells of multicellular organisms. In fact, bacterial cells don't have a nuclear membrane at all. This means their genetic material is not enclosed within a defined nucleus. Cells that have nuclear material but lack a nuclear membrane are called prokaryotic cells. The organisms made up of these types of cells are known as prokaryotes. The term prokaryote comes from Greek, where pro means primitive and karyon means nucleus, highlighting how these are considered the more ancient or simpler form of cells. Examples of prokaryotes include bacteria and blue-green algae, also known as cyanobacteria. On the other hand, cells like onion cells and cheek cells have a well-organized nucleus, which is surrounded by a nuclear membrane. These are called eukaryotic cells. They have a defined nucleus that helps in better organization and regulation of genetic material. Understanding these differences is fundamental because it helps us appreciate the complexity and diversity of life at the cellular level. It also relates to the overall theme of how cells are structured and function in different organisms.